She collapsed. That's how one aide described it. Quiet at first, then sudden. Not theatrical. Not for cameras. Not even for sympathy. Just collapse. And the room went still. But let's rewind. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because the truth is, no one was supposed to know. At least, not like this. Not now. Not ever. If some had their way. But the chain reaction had already begun before the results even hit the airwaves. The question that shook the monarchy didn't arrive with a crown or a press release. It came printed on white paper, sealed in plastic, and hidden behind doors that had remained shut for generations. Is King Charles really Prince Harry's father? A dangerous question, and for some, a long-suspected one. So when the test results, reportedly ordered in secret and leaked in panic, finally emerged, they did more than cause a ripple. They sent shockwaves through a family built on legacy. But it wasn't King Charles who broke first, and it wasn't Harry. It was Meghan, which doesn't immediately make sense, does it? This wasn't her DNA. This wasn't her father. So why her? Why did she crumble when the news hit? What did she know or fear that the rest of us didn't? We'll get to that. But let's step carefully, because this story isn't just about biology. It's about timing, trust, silence, and the unbearable weight of a truth buried for decades. You see, most royal scandals erupt with noise, headlines, interviews, staged rebuttals. This one has been different, quieter, more surgical, less about drama and more about damage control. It's not just about paternity, it's about how long the lie was protected, and who stood to lose the most when it finally shattered. Because someone always knows. And as for Meghan's reaction, according to two independent accounts, she reportedly fainted during a private call shortly after Harry received the preliminary confirmation. No cameras, no crowd, just an audible thud, panic, and then silence. But here's where things get strange. Within hours, multiple outlets were told everything is fine, that the couple was enjoying time together, and that rumors were being handled legally. Yet behind those reassurances, insiders described frantic phone calls, legal teams circling, and a sudden lockdown on all outgoing communication from the Sussex camp. So again, why would she be the one to collapse? Was it empathy? Was it fear? Or was it something far more personal? Something connected not just to Harry, but to the truth she may have tried to help bury? And if this was just a matter of DNA, why is the palace bracing for international press fallout? No, the story's deeper than a headline, and far more dangerous than a single test result. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The paper itself was plain, white, unmarked on the outside. Not the kind of thing you'd expect to detonate a legacy. And yet, that envelope, reportedly hand-delivered to Prince Harry in Montecito under a veil of anonymity, didn't just carry data. It carried weight. The kind that bends your spine whether you're royalty or not. But let's slow that down. Because here's the thing. We've all heard whispers over the years about the red hair, the distance, the glances. But rumors are cheap. This wasn't that. This, allegedly, was science. Cold, clinical, unforgiving. So how did it happen? According to one source close to a Sussex family associate, someone described as peripheral but trusted, the test had been commissioned long before the results ever reached Harry's hands. Not by him, not even for him, but as part of a much broader, quieter inquiry, connected to something else entirely. That's where it gets murky. And yet the timing is impossible to ignore. Within 72 hours of the delivery, Harry reportedly canceled 2 calls with UK-based charities. He was then described as visibly shaken during a video call, not angry, not combative, just hollow. And then came Meghan. We mentioned her collapse. But what happened before that collapse? That part hasn't been talked about. Not publicly. Because, just hours before she reportedly lost consciousness, Meghan was seen pacing near the estate's security gate, speaking on the phone, agitated. Witnesses say she was trying to keep her voice down, but clearly upset. The tone? Not grief. Not confusion. One witness described it, flatly, as dread. Now, was she reacting to what Harry had just learned? Or was she anticipating what he was about to? Because here's a question that no one in the royal inner circle seems eager to answer. When, exactly, did Meghan first learn what was in that envelope? Let that settle for a moment. Now, what was inside? The leaked contents, unconfirmed by Buckingham Palace, naturally, reportedly state a 0% probability of biological relationship between King Charles III and Prince Harry. 0. Not inconclusive. Not margin of error. Just a clean, clinical negation of 40 years of assumed truth. But here's what's strange. No one, not even the fiercest royal critics, seem to expect this to surface so cleanly, or now, of all times. Why? Because DNA may answer one question, but it raises 10 more. And some of those aren't just about Harry. They're about Charles, Diana, and what those closest to the crown might have known, long before any results were printed. Which leads us to a deeper concern, not about science, but about silence. Because someone had to have kept this hidden. And if Meghan knew before Harry did, if her reaction wasn't just shock, but recognition, then the real question isn't who Harry's father is. It's who decided to finally tell him. What happens next isn't just a royal revelation. It's a reckoning. And the reckoning doesn't start in the palace. It starts with a single, unanswered question, one we'll face in Chapter 2. What if everything they told you about legacy was built on silence? Not lies, necessarily. Not outright denial. Just a carefully orchestrated omission. Enough truth to keep the throne standing. Enough silence to keep it from crumbling. It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Because in the modern world, especially in the age of headlines and hashtags, you'd think truth would rise to the surface. Especially when it comes to something as cold and clinical as a DNA result. But in this case, the silence might have been louder than the test itself. Why? Because this isn't just about whether Charles is Harry's biological father. It's about what that truth would mean. For Harry. For the monarchy. For the concept of royal succession itself. Think about it. Lineage isn't just a curiosity in royal circles. It's the entire point. Bloodlines are currency. They confer status, shape global perception, define roles not just for one lifetime, but for generations. Remove that pillar, and the entire institution begins to wobble. But here's the irony no one wants to acknowledge out loud. Even if Charles isn't Harry's biological father, nothing actually changes. Legally, at least. Titles remain. The crown stays intact. There's no clause in the royal handbook for genetic reconsideration. And yet, everything changes. Because this isn't about legality. It's about perception. Power isn't about what is. It's about what people believe. And if the public starts to believe that the monarchy concealed something this intimate, this seismic, for over 4 decades, then you've got a crisis not of rules, but of trust. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. According to one senior aide, speaking under condition of anonymity, discussions around uncertainty of parentage did, in fact, surface quietly behind palace doors. Not recently, not after the Oprah interview, but years before Harry ever married Meghan. This wasn't a new whisper. It was an old echo long ignored. So, was it buried intentionally? Or was it dismissed because the truth simply felt unmanageable? That's where fear enters the story. Because institutions, especially ones as old and fragile as the British monarchy, don't survive disruption. They survive containment, damage control, controlled narratives. The idea that lineage might be up for renegotiation doesn't just rattle one generation. It shakes the very foundation of what it means to be royal. And here's where it gets even more delicate. If this test is real, then someone at the top knew long before Harry did. Maybe not in full, but in part. Enough to steer certain conversations. Enough to keep certain documents sealed. Enough to cast long, quiet shadows over public ceremonies that, in hindsight, feel a little colder than they should have. So what now? Well, that depends on how long the silence can be sustained. Because once truth escapes, it doesn't crawl back into its envelope. It festers, it spreads, and it whispers to everyone it touches. If this was kept hidden, what else has been? But the real turning point didn't come from science. It came from a question, a quiet one, spoken behind a locked door. Not, is he the father? But rather, who already knew? That's where we're going next. Because in Chapter 3, we're not just looking at the truth. We're looking at the people who buried it. Someone always knows. That's the part no one ever wants to say out loud. Not in families. Not in governments. And especially not in monarchies. Because while the world is just now hearing whispers about DNA results, secret tests, and unspoken truths, those inside the walls, the ones with the titles, the coats of arms, the centuries of practice in keeping things quiet. They heard the whispers long ago, and they didn't flinch. Not in public, anyway. But what if they didn't flinch because it wasn't news to them? What if the test wasn't shocking, but confirming? Let's backtrack, not to the result, but to the behaviors. Over the past 2 decades, there have been odd choices. Subtle, easy to dismiss. A lukewarm embrace here. A strange seating arrangement there. A speech that left out a name, even though it didn't have to. These things don't mean much in isolation. But together, they start to hum. And then there's the silence. Have you noticed? Since the supposed DNA results came to light, there has been no direct statement from Buckingham Palace. Not even a denial. Just silence. Strategic, disciplined, uncomfortable silence. Which begs the question, if this is false, if this is outrageous fiction, why not kill the story in one line? King Charles is the biological father of Prince Harry. Full stop. But that line never came. Instead, what we've seen is deflection, distraction, stories pushed to the front page that have nothing to do with paternity or lineage. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, insiders say palace aides have entered what's being described as containment mode, limiting interviews, screening statements, cutting access. Why? Because once the question is out, it's no longer just about the test. It's about the timeline, the patterns, the people who had reason to suspect and kept it hidden anyway. One former staffer, who left the royal household in 2009, claims there was an unspoken understanding. Don't ask questions about lineage. Don't repeat rumors. Don't mention James Hewitt, a name the press tossed around recklessly, but one that insiders were told to treat like a ghost. Never confirmed. Never acknowledged. Just dismissed. But if those rumors were ever taken seriously, even once, that changes everything. Because that means Harry didn't just grow up in the dark. He grew up surrounded by people who might have known and chose not to tell him. Chose not to protect him from the eventual impact. Chose to protect the crown instead. And then there's the most damning detail of all. According to a leaked memo, again, unverified but circulated in high-level circles, a private conversation took place nearly 14 years ago between 2 senior royals. The topic? Contingencies in the event of future revelations. Not scandals. Not affairs. Revelations. What were they preparing for? And if that conversation happened, how long has this story really been unfolding behind the scenes? It's not just about a test result. It's about trust. And in the next and final chapter of this story, we confront the one question that might never be answered. Now that the truth is out, who does Harry become? So where does this leave us? Because by now, the shock has worn off. The headlines have begun to settle. But the silence, that tight, echoing silence, still lingers. And maybe that's the most telling part. You see, stories like this don't end with a revelation. They begin with one. Because it's not just about who fathered a child over 4 decades ago. It's about what that truth does once it's out in the open. Who it frees. Who it fractures. Who it forces to look in the mirror and ask, who am I, if everything I was told was wrong? Harry, once the spare, then the rebel, the exile, the father, the memoirist, now faces something far more destabilizing than public scrutiny or tabloid gossip. He faces the collapse of the single thread that tethered him to the crown, identity. Because think about it. He spent the last few years redefining himself outside the royal framework. And now, the framework might never have been built around him to begin with. So does that make his journey more valid? Or more tragic? And what about King Charles? If this result is real, if the test is accurate, if the whispers hold weight, then he, too, is caught in a brutal contradiction. Either he knew and chose to protect the crown over the child, or he didn't, and now must live with the knowledge that the boy he raised, the man who now stands oceans away, was never his by blood. But maybe this isn't about betrayal. Maybe it's about grief. Grief for the lie, for the time lost, for the years of strained distance built on something that was never truly spoken. There's no clean ending here, because the monarchy will continue.